So if you saw my 1.3 drafting guide, then you know I talked a little bit about the flank class not really being in the best state as a whole, again. I didn't really go into detail on why flanks are doing so poorly in the video, and that's mainly because I do my best to keep my drafting guides from going over 15 minutes, because that's the limit of most people's attention spans, and I didn't want to make the video an inconvenience to watch. Now in this video I want to go into detail on the flanks specifically and talk about the reasons why they aren't doing well and how they can be helped out. Now there are two main things that have put flanks down. One is the burst meta we've been in for a bit. We currently have all these characters that can do 1300 burst in less than a second without having to do anything more than pointing and clicking one or two buttons. The closer you get to them, the easier it is for them to land that burst, and what range are flanks built for? Exactly. DPS characters like Cassie, Sha-Lin, Willow, and Drogoz have massive time to kill imbalances thanks to certain talents, making them nearly impossible to flank if they have good awareness and aim. You really can only fight these characters with flanks if they are heavily distracted or rather low. It doesn't really matter if you're up close to them or not, they will probably beat you, because they can still kill you faster and they often require much less finesse and work to do it. Now in the past we have seen flanks who have been able to thrive in the burst meta, but only really because they had imbalances of their own. The last three top tier flanks we had were Buck, Maeve, and Xin. Buck had a massive amount of DR and self-sustain that could be used very often. Maeve also had a pretty sizable amount of DR herself, along with a talent that could do a massive amount of burst without many downsides. Now with Xin, it wasn't so much that he had one single massive imbalance, it was more of him just being really strong in multiple areas, and adding them all up together on top of his low skill requirement made him top tier. I know Yomi is looked at as a massive imbalance by some, but it's nowhere near as blatant as what made Buck and Maeve imbalanced. However, now that those three have been nerfed and the massive imbalances are gone, flanks don't have anything blatantly powerful of their own to balance them out against these powerful burst characters. That's part of the second reason why flanks have fallen off. They've been nerfed so much. Look at every flank with the exception of Koga because he's new. Every single one of them has been nerfed multiple times. Some, like Eevee for example, have been nerfed more than the entirety of certain classes, and that's not even really an exaggeration. Hi-Rez has said before that the most difficult class for them to balance is probably Frontline, but if we look at all the evidence, it seems like flanks are the hardest for them to balance. I mean, this is the only class in the game that's fallen out of the meta before. Now, they're difficult to balance for good reason. In the lower tiers, flanks are often looked at as overpowered, and that's mainly because in lower tiers, people don't have the awareness, aim, or knowledge needed to properly deal with a flank. People can pick them and have a lot more leeway with them because of those things, which warrants nerfs to make it easier for those kinds of players to deal with the flanks. While in the higher tiers, people do have those things, and if a flank isn't rewarding enough, people can easily deal with them. So there's always this thing where Hi-Rez has to try and balance these characters for both low and high tier players, and in reality it's an incredibly difficult thing to do. So again, often they just end up getting nerfed. The easiest way to make a balanced flank is to make a very skill dependent and very rewarding one, so they can't just be picked up and used to great effect at the start. However, if this was done for every flank, you alienate new players from the class, so it's difficult to balance flanks perfectly. Now, going back to the burst meta, let's say all of the burst was fixed and the burst meta was gone. Then all we'd be left with is these nerfs. Flanks would still be better because they'll have fairer fights, but there's still the fact that some have just been nerfed too much and in the wrong ways. Buck is one of the cases where they did it right. He blatantly had too much sustain and DR and it was brought down. Buck is still doing okay as of right now, and if the burst meta went away, he'd be really solid but not overwhelming like he was. Maeve wasn't really done right. Maeve had one viable playstyle and that playstyle was nerfed. Now it did deserve to be nerfed, don't get me wrong, but not without giving some love to her other playstyles, because now Maeve doesn't really have anything. Artful Dodger hasn't been good back since it lost the debuff cleanse, and Rogue's Gambit hasn't been good since Maeve lost a lot of her base damage too. And that sucks because those two talents don't just smack damage onto something and unbalance the character, they actually offer you something different. I'd say either give Maeve the Cot Cleanse back with the 400 healing, or don't give the cleanse back and instead just give her the 900 healing back like Maeve had at her release. Then for Rogue's Gambit, all you really have to do is buff Maeve's base damage back up. Like back up to 500 pounds and the 420 for the daggers at least. The talent is good because it can offer you so much more mobility through having pounce up more often, but it isn't overpowered since it takes skill to use that mobility effectively. Its only problem is Maeve doesn't have the base damage to back it up. Currently, 2 sets of daggers and a pounce can't kill anything above 2000 health, and with the numbers I said, you could at least kill the 2100 health characters with the combo, and everything above that would require 3 sets of daggers or a luminary boost. Obviously, if you buff pounce damage, you have to lower street justice accordingly too. As for Cat Burglar, it isn't bad, but it isn't really all that great either. I mean, it is only some bonus damage smacked onto a long cooldown ability. I think it'd be pretty cool if it let you attack during Prowl, and increase the duration of it on top of that. That would definitely offer players a different way to play Maeve. Now with Xin, for one, you'd undo his base damage nerf so he has 450 per horizontal swing instead of 400, and fixing the bug where his projectiles clip against walls super easily would help a lot too. Then you'd balance Yomi. This could be done in a few different ways. One is you could remove the pierce, and maybe make it so the bonus damage is removed after the heavy hit leaves the normal base range of the attack. So it can still go super far, but if you hit it super far it's only doing 700. The only thing that lowering his base damage did was make Yomi more needed than it already was before, and lowered the viability of his other talents. Now Eevee is pretty simple. The main thing would be to fix her bugs. Her bugs make her an absolute nightmare to play sometimes. All of the bugs that are associated with her blink, for instance, are very detrimental to her character. The blink bugs aren't because of ping or lag or latency or anything like that, because it was apparently worse for the pros on LAN, so they're definitely bugs. Giving her some base damage back would also be pretty good for her too, like back up to 900 instead of 850. Undoing some of her soar speed and blink range nerfs would also work wonders. Making her reprieve talent 450 a second instead of 300 could also bring it back into viability. I know it was overtuned at 600 per second back in the day, but now it's really underpowered, so I think the mid ground would be nice. Now her snow globe talent is a pretty cool idea. It could use some love, but I don't really know how I would buff it. Moving on to Talus, he could use his 2000 health back. If they want to lower his DR because of it, then they can, but it is better to have the health than the DR. His punch is still pretty buggy. It kinda sends people too far sometimes, so you knock them out of your preferred range, and when I say too far, I've gone well up into the sky, like a Throgos thrust before. He also can't seem to land the punch after ulting somebody anymore, at least consistently. So if that could be fixed, that'd be pretty good. Outside of that, I don't really think he needs anything else, as long as the burst meta goes away. Androxus is a tough one, probably the toughest. What I'd do is remove the bonus damage from heads will roll, but I'd also make him fire slower and hit harder. Sorta like he did before, except make it feel more like a real revolver. Heavy hitting and powerful. I'd also mess with his damage fall off a bit to make him have better poke. I think heads will roll would still be okay since it gives you 2 more bullets, but it may end up needing something else with that, just not bonus damage. Godslayer I think is okay how it is. It's bonus damage, but it does guarantee that reversal will always have something to fire out of it, so I'm okay with it. Darkstalker, however, is just bonus damage, and it isn't really useful either. Old Darkstalker with the 3 separate nether steps was pretty crazy, but I think if the talent made it so you had 3 separate steps on a resource system like Koga's, that'd be pretty cool. A resource system requires more skill than cooldowns do after all. As for his Defiant Fist talent, I have no idea, honestly, really I do not. When it comes to Lex, I do a similar thing as far as his weapons go, with his weapons hitting harder but firing slower like they used to. This makes him take aim and not mindless spam. I'd also make it so when he uses his Retribution skill, it doesn't give you the same target you just had on. Outside of that, I'm not too positive. Lex is the flank I have the least amount of ideas on how to improve him and his talents. Moji is somebody that I wouldn't do a whole lot to. Her hitbox is pretty massive because of her lizards, so I'd lower that like how they did with Drogos. I'd also make her Yummy talent part of her base kit because her ultimate does kind of suck. It's very liable to get you killed with how vulnerable it makes you. There would obviously have to be a new talent to replace it. I'd also fix Scamper leaving your hitbox behind when you use it. It sucks to die to something that didn't even hit you, especially when you're already so wide. Outside of that, I think that Moji would be fine with the burst meta gone. It is a lot easier to make use of her sustain and survivability when you don't die instantly to a few button presses. Now Skye just needs a full-on kit rework, which they've said in the past they're going to give her, but lately they've only talked about a visual one, and we have seen a glimpse of what that's going to look like in the Koga trailer. Hopefully they don't skip out on the kit rework. There is no character in the game that needs it more than her. As for Koga, like I said in the last video, I'd like to take as much time as possible before I really talk about him, since he does have a very high skill cap due to his resource system. But I will talk a little bit about him, on the stuff I'm positive on at least. He's not really better than the other flanks. He's good, but he's nothing super fantastic. I know some have been asking for nerfs when it comes to Koga, but man does he not need any. Really what Koga needs is bug fixes. His bugs make him very frustrating to play, just like how Eevee's does to her. His wall climbing is very buggy, and so is his skewer. Sometimes he just refuses to cling onto walls, and some walls he can't even climb even though they visually look like he can. His skewer leaves his hitbox behind like Blink and Scamper does, and that gets him killed. It can also teleport him somewhere he wasn't even going on top of that. Outside of that, I currently don't think he needs any buffs or nerfs. He's pretty well balanced around his skill requirement and skill cap. I never see Kogas going off unless they're really good or the enemy is doing something really wrong, like with most flanks. Anyway, that's my thoughts on the flanks. Hopefully Hi-Rez fixes the burst meta and gives the flanks some love. The livestream for the next update is coming out on the 9th, so hopefully that update will bring some of the more needed balancing. What about you guys though? If you could do something to the flanks, what would you do? Let me know in the comments below. And that's pretty much it, guys. I want to thank you all for watching. I very much appreciate it. Now I'm going to see you guys later. Bye.